Redo the back.
That's a mess.
But it's always interesting.
This is only in a place like Wakulla, we can still see this. Instead of a rural environment, still have them pop up.
He smells good. It does. Let's see how many phone calls this week. Maybe I should ask Jennifer. Yep, we get a phone call. How many from Frank this week?
Smith Ticker.
Madam Chair?
You got your planning calendar with you?
I do. You need me to get you one?
Nope.
Hey, is Ralph back? Hey. It's time.
We are live. Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock and we are all here today for a budget workshop. And I am going to turn it over to David and Randy.
Thank you.
It's on the agenda later on, Randy. You can quit right now if you'd like before we start. Thank you.
This agenda, the workshop is our second scheduled workshop in the development of the FY 21-22 budget and includes, Mickey went off, and includes the wastewater rate study, which will follow this directly after our budget workshop. We'll just flow right into the rate, the wastewater rate study, and we have Raftillis here to represent Henry. With Raftillis is here, and he will be giving that presentation, but it'll flow right after our budget workshop. So with that, I'm going to give it to Randy.
Yes, thank you. This is going to be, we're going to have one more workshop in the budget adoption process, and that'll be at the second meeting in August. If we cover anything today and the board hears something and they want to give direction and a consensus on anything, because what we talk about today is going to be the budget that you get turned over this Thursday, which will be the 15th. So there's one thing that I'm aware of that came to mind since we sent this out, and that'll be a change, but other than that, I need some feedback if there's anything you want to see differently in the budget. So our total countywide proposed budget is over $122 million. Our general fund, let's see.
Is it running on the slideshow?
I don't know how it's running. It's going in the wrong direction. Oh, there we go. Well, maybe not.
It's showing a preview.
Okay, so here we go. Yeah, this is our countywide proposed budget, $122 million. General fund makes up about $40 million of that. Our special revenue funds, $38.5 million. Our construction funds or our capital projects funds, $17.5 million. And then our business activities, which are also our enterprise funds, make up $26.6 million. So we're going to break this out little by little.
Let's get this. Where it's showing where it's supposed to be. It's showing a preview of the next slide. Can't hit view slideshow?
That's what I'm in.
And
It's set up weird. I've never seen it like that. Pretty good. I don't know why it's recording. I don't know where that is.
Huh.
The settings look different in here. I have no idea.
What about on the bottom there, Jess?
Same thing.
Take it back to there, that's easier to read.
Go to the other one.
No, the other one.
It's the same.
I know, but it's bigger. There you go.
Can I still use the clicker from that? Okay. Before we move past this slide, our current year budget as amended through May 31st is $107 million. And so this budget is a $15.3 million or 14.3% increase over what we have right now in the current year. So our objectives for 21-22, and some of them are pretty significant, is first of all, we want to put ourselves on a path for the new labor laws, minimum wage labor laws that take effect September 30th, 2022, which is $11 an hour, and ending at $15 an hour September 30th, 2026. Is that right? Or 2025?
6.
So we're going to set ourselves up on a path that by the time we get there, we will be in full compliance with those new rules. We also want to adjust our employees' salaries to be accordance with their market value and be competitive. We would like to commit a portion of the millage rate each year to fund public safety increases, the largest portion being the sheriff's office, but this also covers a portion of EMS and fire rescue. And then what we would like to accomplish this year is also to eliminate using cash for recurring expenses in the sheriff's fund. We have some technology in our constitutional offices that is outdated, and we need to modernize those processes. We want to implement the dedicated funding for fire protection for capital equipment purchases. We want to get our wastewater system set up for the future and for future maintenance and repair and improvements. And then we want to maintain our solid waste fund through our remaining debt service so we can have a balance there with our solid waste rates. One significant thing that's not on this slide is we're also moving forward with our countywide emergency radio system. And this budget that we'll talk about actually includes a new department so that we can segregate the costs to maintain and repair that system that we currently have, and then we can track any future expenses of the new system. Oh, you went one? There we go. This slide right here, I show this to you because this is going to be what your citizens see in the newspaper on September 16th. This is the exact format that DOR requires that we advertise. Some of these numbers, as I just mentioned, they're going to change slightly, but for the most part, this is all going to be exactly what they see September 16th. So it breaks down our expenses and our revenues from general fund, special revenue, capital projects, enterprise funds. And then in this advertisement in particular, we have an elimination of our interfund transfers, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, our double counting. So our actual countywide budget with those transfers eliminated is just under $104 million.
So we highlight a yellow like that?
It will probably be gray in the Wakulla News. And just so everybody knows, that's a required format by DOR. We are not allowed to deviate from that format with the exception of they have approved adding that elimination of the interfund transfer column. And it will advertise adjacent to a notice of proposed tax increase. All right, so this is a snapshot of our countywide revenues. And you can see for us, the biggest portion of our revenues are intergovernmental. So countywide, that encompasses our state revenue sharing, half-cent sales tax, fiscally constrained, any grant funding that we get from DOT, DEP, water management, whoever gives us grant funding. And then that is $49.2 million. And then our cash and our transfers in is our next biggest source of $37 million.
So the revenue sharing is the only one we can use for actual expenses. Everything else is capital.
State revenue sharing in the general fund, yes, we can use that for any general government purpose.
Not all these other stuff.
The other things, yeah, this is the whole entire budget rolled into one pie. We're going to break out the slices of the pie as we go through. All right, so these are our expenses countywide broken down the same way. And you can see that our salaries and wages make up about 5% of our overall budget, and then benefits 3%. The largest portion of our budget is dedicated to equipment, capital, and construction. The caveat here is that in our transfers to constitutional officers, there is salaries and wages in those transfers, but we budgeted as one lump sum that we transferred to their office, so it's counted as a transfer and not a salary or benefit here when we roll everything together. get on the right one here. And then these are our expenses countywide. This is by function. Public safety, 7%. Our general government administration makes up 7%. Our physical environment is our largest expense, and that's going to cover, of course, our solid waste and our sewer fund. And then our transportation is 12%. That covers our road department and the airport. And then which I just said, general government, that's administration like us here, and then facilities and fleet maintenance, things that serve to provide service to all the other general fund departments and other departments as well. So this is a snapshot broke down of the individual types of revenue that we're going to receive, and now we're just talking about general fund. We're moving on from countywide, and we're getting down to just general fund. So of course our ad valorem tax, it's kind of self-explanatory, that's $12.6 million. And then all of our other taxes rolled together in that second line, $2.9 million. The increase is $337,000, and that's mainly due to our PST. Also, if you notice on the licenses and special assessments, we have a $570,000 increase. We went from $5,000 in the current year to $575,000 proposed. The reason for that is where we were capturing the building department fees, the object code for that, so like the little road map of how everything gets paid from a certain spot, the object code was changed, and so we've adjusted that. So it used to be captured in charges for services, and now it's going to be captured in license and special assessments, and you'll see that a little easier, a little clearer here in a future slide. Again, here our intergovernmental revenues, that is just in the general fund. So Commissioner Merritt, this is where your state revenue sharing and your half-cent sales tax and your fiscally constrained are captured. And then our charges for services, that's going to be things like our planning and zoning, parks department, probation, EMS fees, and you see that there is a decrease, and that's because of what we just talked about, those building funds, that building permit revenues that were previously captured there, we have moved them up to where they really belong in the chart of accounts. Fines, we have very few, that's animal services and code enforcement, and then miscellaneous revenue is pretty much made up of our interest that we earn on cash and investments. Cash forward, pretty self-explanatory. You had something to say.
Well, as part of this budget, we are this year budgeting all of our reserves forward, so that also increases that.
So the previous years, that was just extra money. Now, all our reserves.
Not exactly. So primarily you bring cash forward in order to set a reserve. So it gives you the option to have a contingency should you have an unexpected expense during the year. However, because we have a fund balance policy, we don't want to bring more cash forward and deplete our fund balances in each fund where they would drop below that fund balance policy in the event that we were to spend it. Now it's full reserve, and we typically do not spend it, but it is a contingency and it could happen. So I have to kind of balance how much cash we bring forward and make sure we still maintain that fund balance policy for each fund. So we bring as much cash forward as we can to still stay in compliance with our fund balance policy. That make sense?
As I said, budgeting as much.
Well, you said all. That's different. Always different.
Anyway, it's with maximum
Okay. Go to the next chart. This is going to be our general fund revenue by type, just broke down again our intergovernmental revenues, a big portion of what we receive here in the county. Our ad valorem taxes make up 32% of our general fund. So between ad valorem and intergovernmental, that's over half of our general fund revenue. And then about a quarter of our total general fund budget is cash, and then those other smaller revenues like the charges for services and transfers and fines, they make up that remaining quarter. So here is our historical property values since 16, 17. Obviously, their value is increasing rapidly at this point. So looking at last year's, what we based our ad valorem revenue on, the existing increase for this year for things that were already constructed was over $42 million. And that's the millage rate value, not the value of, and then the new construction is just under 79 million for a total of over 121 million. Spit it out. Yeah, it is. So what we're proposing in this budget to turn over to the board is a millage rate of 8.825 mils. For the last 3 years, we have been holding at that 8.00 millage rate. And so it's been quite some time since we've actually had a millage rate adjustment, even though at the time those were considered tax increases because we did not go to the rollback rate. And having this millage rate, we have been successful in building up all of our fund balances, so our general fund is very healthy, but at the same time, what we're going to talk about is some of our compensation, we wouldn't have got where we are quite as fast. Our expenses would have been a little higher had we been adjusting our salaries accordingly all along.
The purpose of us requesting this increase, this is primarily a public safety increase on the ad valorem side. It takes up for the loss of ice, gives the salary increases for our sheriff's department, fixes there's a whole lot of things that happen here, as well as fire rescue salaries as well. So this is the purpose of that increase is for that public safety.
For us to build in the new fire stations too, or that don't?
I don't mind.
That's adding the 4 new positions that we talked about, and
That's part of this, yes.
That'll be on the MSBU.
Yeah, well, part of it's MSTU, part of it's this. That's right.
You think that was on the next slide, by the way. So, as David said, we have a ad valorem increase of $2.1 million. We want to dedicate that 8.25 mils, 0.825 to public safety, and this is a comparison of the current year, what we had budgeted on based on the proposed for 21-22, and you can see the difference that new construction makes, and plus that millage rate, it's significant. But we do want to segregate this going forward so that every year, regardless of what our millage rate is, we make that calculation, and that 0.825 automatically goes to fund those public safety increases.
That's just a...
Yeah, it's a calculation. It's simple, and it's easier than implementing a whole brand new MSTU, so we can do it kind of internally, and we can make that calculation, but it serves the same function.
Sound.
In theory.
So these are our changes in our other general fund revenues, and again, this is the change between the current year amended budget as we sit through May 31st. So our PST, we're estimating that it's going to increase by about $332,000 over current year. Communication service tax is pretty flat. We backed way up on it in the current year, and so we think we can go a little further on that, $15,000. And then these building departments, or building permits that we talked about, here is the change there, the $575,000 increase, and then the corresponding decrease is on the bottom, the $520,000. Incidentally, the building department is really rocking and rolling right now, so we're going to start segregating some of that funding. One of the statutory uses for the excess fund balance is for a building, and so we're going to start holding that aside for a future new building department building when we all have to move. So, but they are rocking and rolling right now. And half-cent sales tax, about a $53,000 increase, fiscally constrained, $71,000, and then some smaller increases below in our planning department, and then our tax collector fees and EMS fees. There you go. Alright, so here's where our double counting comes in. Is everybody ready? So our property appraiser, tax collector, and clerk all have a subcomponent fund in the general fund. So they're under the general fund umbrella. So we record some revenue twice, once in the general fund and then once in the individual constitutional officers fund. This only affects the three that you have on the screen because the sheriff has his own special revenue fund that's not under the umbrella of the general fund, and so does the supervisor of elections. And so when we talk about these and we talked about that elimination of interfund transfer, just be aware sometimes these things are counted in multiple places. And I think, did you have a question about that? How that works?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about. How does that, that's what I wanted to get explained to me.
It's basically, we cannot move money in between funds without recording transactions in both of them. So if we collect the revenue in the general fund, we record it as a revenue. Then when you're going to transfer it to a constitutional officer, they also have to record it as a revenue in their fund. So you've counted that revenue in both places.
Both places, okay.
And the same on the expense side. If we transfer it out, it's an expense, and then they're going to spend it at some point, and so they're going to record an expense. See, that was painless.
Yep.
Now, the sheriff's under the fine and forfeiture fund?
It's sheriff fund.
Sheriff's fund.
Yep, and then the supervisor of elections is a custodial fund that doesn't run through we transfer money out to him, but it doesn't, the BOCC doesn't approve their budget, but the clerk's office does the books for him, and so it's a custodial fund. So in our cash forward, in general admin, our increase is $1.5 million. We are funding a $2.5 million reserve as opposed to, I think, $2 million in the current year. So that's a portion of your increase there. Revenue stabilization fund is where we had the biggest increase in cash forward, and because we moved some funding over there the current fiscal year, and so that cash, as David mentioned, we're going to bring all our reserves forward. There's no fund balance policy for revenue stabilization fund, so there's no operating expenses or any debt service tied to that fund, so we're going to bring as much of that cash forward as possible. And then the property appraiser, he has requested some items that are one-time expenses and they're appropriate uses for cash forward. The tax collector is finally starting to build up a little bit of a fund balance, and I brought that forward as a contingency for their office. Same thing with the clerk's office, they have a contingency fund. So this is going to just talk about what we just mentioned. This is what our cash is going to be used for. So our general administration cash forward is $3.1 million. And then we're going to add that $1 million in our revenue stabilization fund together. That's $4.1 million. 2.5 of that is going to sit in reserve. So in the general fund, if we spend all of our entire budget, which we typically do not, up to $1.5 million in next fiscal year could be used for recurring. I would look for that number to be closer to $1 million, and this is how we're kind of feathering in these higher expenses so that we can live within this millage rate, because we have a lot of other rates that are going to increase, and then we can feather that use of cash down over a 2-year period. We also have some one-time purchases. We've got some equipment in our general fund for facilities, EMS, Parks and Recreation, and fleet. And what will be added in here is about $42,000 for the library computers that will be replaced next fiscal year. And so all those equipment, that's an appropriate use of cash because those are not recurring year over year. We're going to do that one time and then that's it. But up to $1.5 million could be used because we're feathering in these higher expenses of the salaries. You're going the wrong way. You're still going the wrong way. David's trying to get through this really fast.
I'm going. There we go.
You should be on 17. Okay, no, you're not quite there. Keep going.
There. That's where we're at.
Okay, one more down.
One more down.
Yeah. All right, there we go. So these are general fund expenses, and these are broken down by expense type. So our total general fund increase is over $10 million over the current fiscal year. And you can see that column there that compares the two, increase or decrease, how those individual line items, how they compare. So the largest increase is in our salaries and wages line, and that's going to be the effect of our compensation study and the plan that we have developed in order to get to where we need to be with those new minimum wage requirements. And then our benefit line, that's going to be our CHP, and then our FRS. That doesn't seem like much of an increase, but health insurance is difficult to predict very accurately because you cannot know who's going to get married or divorced or have a baby and change coverage. So what we use is a blended rate of $15,000 for all employees, like potential employees, positions to be filled. But a lot of that is you just cannot predict what changes will happen throughout the year. And our FRS rates increase this year were not huge, so that was very helpful because sometimes they really get there after you. And then the other big increase we have is our interfund transfers, and that is mainly our transfer to the sheriff's office. All right. So breaking this down, our general fund expenses by type, 18% for salaries, wages, and benefits. And then, of course, that big transfer component for our constitutional officers and also our reserves. So those are our largest components of our general fund expenses. Now, we call your reserve an expense because that's where it's recorded in the accounting system, but the intent is not to spend it. The intent is to save it, but it is available as a contingency, and typically, if we needed to dip into it, we would bring it before the board, and we would justify the reasoning, and a budget amendment would accompany it as well, and so the board would actually approve to release reserve funds and reallocate them to whatever line they needed to go.
So, just for my understanding here, all of a sudden our reserves went up by 4 million. That's just the way we state it?
COVID money.
Part of it is the way we state it. Our revenue stabilization fund is wrapped in with our general fund. That's how it's presented with our financial statement. And so anything in our revenue stabilization fund is also reported here. It's under our general fund's umbrella. And so a large portion of those reserves are, yes, in the revenue stabilization fund. And the building department is presented here as well, consistent with the financial statements.
So that's money from Corona.
Yes.
That's where it came from.
But it already, this money already existed.
We got reimbursed for money we spent at the sheriff's department from coronavirus.
This is the CARES Act money.
Correct. That's why it went up so drastic.
That's what I was,
They can't say that, but I can say it.
You got it. All right, so this is going to be salaries only. Most of our operating expenses we're holding them pretty flat as far as utilities and supplies. Where there are deviations, we're going to talk about on the next slide, things that are significant, but this is a comparison for each one of our general fund departments, the salaries and benefits in the current year as opposed to what we're proposing for 21-22. We got a couple little anomalies here, and they're easily explained. Our collections seems like a large increase because of proportionally and percentage-wise. We have an employee that transferred from our animal services division, long-time employee, already making a substantial amount of salary, so we kept that, and so that's why you have a corresponding decrease in animal services. So our other issue, or other things that are kind of anomalies, our planning department, that is for an additional position in 21-22. Our library went up considerably. The personnel there are some of our most affected employees when it comes to the new minimum wage requirements, and so we have a lot of adjustment to do out there.
Does the minimum wage adjustment go up to 11, or do you don't shoot straight to 15?
I'll go through that with y'all individually, but I got it where it hits in each segment to make sure we cover in each segment. Now, some $15, some folks get 15, an automatic increase got them there, or leveling, or put them in the study. So that's, I'll have to explain all that. That gets real deep fast.
Our extension office increase is due to our 4-H program in the current fiscal year. Because this is a new program, we didn't know what to budget, and so if you're looking at budget to budget, it looks like a large increase. We're already incurring those expenses actually, we just didn't have a budget to compare it to. And then
For those programs that y'all approved.
the summer camp and after-school programs.
Right.
And then our probation department, we have a part-time position that is scheduled to be a full-time position. That accounts for the majority of that increase. And then in EMS, that's going to be a portion of our 6 new FTEs that we talked about at the MSBU workshop. 62% of their wages and benefits is charged to the general fund. So operationally, these are our major changes. We're looking at some janitorial services, partly because of the 4-H programs and the use of the community center, and then our new Panacea Community Center is very heavy, and with the staff that we have, they're just not able to keep up, and it's some off hours. You need somebody that comes in and kind of works like late at night or really early in the morning, and so it might be effective for us to have a janitorial service, then hire additional staff to do that.
This is going to be subcontracted out.
Yes, this will be a contracted service.
More than likely, the library will be included.
Yep. And then, speaking of the library, this is the increase of about $65,000, and these are recurring expenses we're talking about here, so year over year, as dedicated IT services through Inspired to help them. They're losing their IT support, and so Inspired has agreed to take that on, and so that is the cost of your fiber and then your monthly support fees right there.
What are they doing now?
They are not doing very well right now. Wilderness Coast, and I'm not an expert on this, but Robin is here. Wilderness Coast was able to provide those services, but for some reason, they are not able to do it anymore. You have more information on that?
They were on the chopping block. The state have their entire budget cut, so they're trying to not have us as dependent on
Gotcha.
them for that portion of what they provide.
And then our property and liability insurance, that's an increase that we see each year. It varies. Our communication system, so this is our countywide emergency radio system, maintenance and repair. We're budgeting $50,000 right now because we don't know what we don't know. And it is a new expense, it's a new department, and we will be able to track those costs and know what they will be. But right now, it's just a swag because we haven't been doing it, so we have to start somewhere.
I mean, we are spending something on maintenance of the communication system, obviously.
The county has not been. I think the sheriff's department, I don't know who has been, or maybe nobody has been, and I think that's part of the problem.
Well, that's what they said, Tusla said, and now my question is, are we gonna hire somebody, this is gonna be their full-time job to make sure the radio system, all that, because you're gonna have EMS, fire, sheriff's office, the county's gonna be,
We'll sub all that
All
out.
the contracts.
Yeah,
Contract with, whoever, whoever we go with.
Somebody's been paying more royalties to try to get this system to work, obviously.
Yeah, we've been paying that. We between the county and the sheriff's office, and we've been paying those bits and pieces, but there's nothing been formal, and that's what we're trying to do, is formalize it.
yeah, because at the end of the day, it's the county-wide radio system, and we're responsible for it, so we have to start somewhere recording those costs so we know, going forward, what the cost to operate and maintain the system is. So that's our starting point. And then our equipment costs... Okay, back up.
The sheriff's department didn't request funding for maintenance of the communications, right?
They did not, and this is not under the sheriff's department, this is under general administration of the county.
We never had a budget line item.
We have never had a budget line item, and I don't know if that's what contributed to it not getting repaired, and
I guess it's kind of like when we broke out the ice, you're just trying to get an idea of what it actually,
yes,
we are spending, somebody's spending something.
it's not the county. So if anybody's spending money, it would have to be the sheriff's office, because I see all the bills, and we're not paying any.
So anyway, what this does, especially during this period of time where we're going to be in transition to an old system and a new system, we really want to track that and make sure. And also, I'm assuming this is where we'll pull in the new revenue and stuff like that we get for the grant funding.
Yes.
We'll pull it into here and the construction out. So it's set up to be both. Once the construction's over with, we'll track maintenance, track construction, and then construction will fall out, but it'll be a maintenance.
My whole point was, and don't tell Jared I said this, but if we're gonna start paying for something that he's been paying for, that should come out of his budget.
Well, Jennifer, can you speak to this, or no?
A little bit, so there used to be a maintenance contract that came out of the sheriff's office budget way back, it expired, so to speak. They're actually, and that I can't tell you too, I was wishing the game was here, I was actually fixing the text earlier to it. So some of the things, like right now, there is a project being done to the tune of around $40,000, and Dan had worked with you on that, and so it's not just a sheriff's office communication system, it's the whole county's communication system. So when there are big costs, then we do normally work with the county to figure out how to cover
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so there is something being
Yes,
spent.
the big stuff we've taken care of.
Smaller fees have come out of the sheriff's office budget for some things, but there have been some things that we have also gone to the county. And I can't remember, there was a specific pot of money that those came out of, but I can't speak for that.
So we've got to start somewhere. This is where we're starting. The equipment cost, a decrease of $155,000, that is because our phone system is going to be installed in the current fiscal year. We had budgeted for it this year, so that goes away, so that's your equipment decrease. Aids and contributions. Oh. All of your nonprofits that the BOCC provides funding for submitted their budget requests in accordance with the administrative regulation that was approved in 2020. Everybody dotted all the i's and crossed the t's. The senior center contribution, they have requested an additional almost $16,000 each year. And then the Sewer and Water Board, he was here and spoke to you at a regular board meeting probably 2 months ago. Of course, that request increased $3,500. So I provided a copy of the senior center's budget request to each one of you. It was placed in your box. I don't know if you have any comments or any feelings about this, or if you want it to be included in the budget as proposed right now.
So that, you're saying that's an increase?
That is an increase,
Right now.
$69,101.
And they want 16,000 more?
Yes.
Well, their fundraising hadn't been going like it should have because of COVID and some other stuff, so I'm fine with the increase with it. We need it.
We get audited books?
I did. I actually received the most information that I have ever received from the Senior Citizens Center. You had a complete copy of what they turned in. It's in your mailbox. Oh, okay, so.
We gotta be cautious because VFW would like to have money.
I understand that, and that's why we created
Feral Cat would probably love that.
that administrative regulation, and everybody that is nonprofit was in compliance with it, and so my job is to post what they request and let you guys make the decision if you approve it. No, they're the only two that requested an increase. Red Cross and We Care, they did not request an increase from their current funding level.
Also, the Senior Citizen Center, they do perform a service for us, for their senior citizen transport that we would have to fund. So they haven't asked for a increase in,
Transportation disadvantage.
Right.
They get grants for that.
well, there's a grant, but we also pay for that as well. We have to cost share that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there is a difference here. They all perform, and the monies that we're paying them are going towards that. Okay.
Okay. Transfers to other funds, go to the next slide.
I swear I do.
Okay, so one of our significant increases here, as we talked about, $2.2 million increase going to the sheriff's fund, and we all know that that's to fill the hole, not use cash, and then to make up for the loss of the ICE revenue. And then the guardian ad litem and the hardship program transfers changed very little, just under $20,000 total. I think we've kind of covered this a little bit, but we're talking about, we're still in our general fund, but we're in our component funds for our constitutional officers, and so basically these amounts here are what they have asked the board to fund over and above the current year. With the exception of the clerk's office, everything has been posted as they requested. The clerk was interested in starting the internal audit department this year, but we talked and we felt like maybe this wasn't the right year since we have so many other significant changes going on. And so these are the increases that your elected officials have requested. And as we know, some of this is equipment and modernization of technology that is very important to our county as far as it relates to our election system and then our CAMA system in the property appraiser's office. So
I was gonna say, so this is the 60,000, the 327,560 property, so the equipment of the $60,000 is included in the.
a portion of that, yes, is
It's not
equipment.
reoccurring, so this.
Not all of that.
Be a reoccurring.
Not all of that, although I can't speak to whether he's going to have additional technology or equipment. I know he's in need of some trucks and things like that, and so we'll have to see what of this is.
Once we get through these capital purchases, though, theoretically, I understand the year-to-year increase because of cost of living and so forth, but we're not going to see next year Ed's budget, unless he's buying a lot of capital, should go.
Way
He's not going to need an additional $327,000.
I would hope so. However, the tax collector is in a different situation. The former tax collector was in the drop program for FRS, and now they're not, and that's a significant cost each year. The elected official component is over 50% now, so whatever the salary is, that's what the FRS contribution, 50% of that is. That's a big difference to a small office. And then the supervisor of elections, those are mostly recurring. Once we implement the new, I think some of that is equipment, scanners, and things like that. I'm sorry, I've talked to every one of them, and they're all jumbling together right now. And so you're right, some of these will not be as high next year.
Joe, yours is recurring every year, 148,000?
Pretty close to that. Mine will go down somewhat. We've got some equipment that we definitely need to upgrade dramatically. But after this year, it should start going back down.
This is also your increase for your assistant, right?
Correct.
For that too.
That will all take care of everything. That will also include, with my part of the budget, that also includes a
a part-time staff person as well if we go that route.
And also, this includes, it went from $5,000 to $50,000 for IT services,
Correct.
which is a portion of this as well.
Correct.
Because of your new voting system?
No. IT.
It's,
That's right, you and I talked about that, yeah.
This is something that went from 5,000 to 42,000. It was just their cost of saying,
Take it or leave
to
it.
catch up from where we should have been. And basically, I had a conversation with them, and it's basically a liability issue more than anything. So it's for them to stand up and say, we're going to be standing right beside you if anything comes up. So whereas Washington County had that same issue in the 2018 election, and their IT people folded up shop and left. So, whenever that happens, you got to have somebody standing beside you that can, withstand the storm, if you will.
Is Nick still,
What's that?
Nick still there?
Yep.
And then our other large increase in transfers was from our revenue stabilization fund. You went ahead a little bit too fast. That we have transferred $1 million to our Gulf Triumph Fund for a system match, radio system match. We don't have an agreement with them yet, but we do know that there will be some type of match required, so we're trying to plan for it with the information that we have. Your constitutional officers, like we said, this top box or the top table up there, this is the transfer from the BOCC. If they have a subcomponent fund under the general fund, then this is where it's going to get a little confusing. Hold on. Let's just look at the bottom table. This is going to be what your constitutional officers' total budgets are, and then there's a comparison from the current year to the proposed budget next year. And I think we've kind of talked about all of these increases, and we talked about them in a previous workshop. They're all here if you have any specific questions, but most of these are either going to be equipment related or salary adjustments that were out of control. There's FRS changes, and we have talked to them about the new minimum wage laws. I think all of our elected officers are in a good position going forward where everybody will be in compliance by the deadline. And so unless you have any additional questions for them about this, we'll just move on.
What's the top part?
The top part is the transfer that's under the BOCC umbrella, and the amount it differs from the bottom table. So if you look at the clerk, the very first line, $778,000, that's what we transfer out to the clerk's office and into their fund in the bottom. And so they can bring cash forward if they have cash in their fund balance, and that's going to be your difference in those amounts. And that's why this gets a little confusing, because what we transfer them is not necessarily what their total budget is going to be. They might ask for cash, they might have other revenues and things like that. So that's why it's a little confusing. So again, this is looking at the current fiscal year to propose. These are our changes in reserves. So our general administration reserve is going to increase about $726,000. The clerk has a small decrease because we planned for a big leave payout that has occurred, and so they don't need as much cash. And then again, the tax collector with the contingency. Our big change here, of course, is our revenue stabilization fund. In our building fund, $115,000 increase. Before we move on from the general fund, is there any individual department or specific cost, anything that you want to dive down in? Commissioner Merritt?
Do we resolve the canvassing board line item somewhere in this?
No, that's something we're going to have to do in next year's budget, yes.
Okay.
All right, that'll be one of the changes.
I'm sorry.
That'll be into, I would imagine that could hit in 22-23's budget. It doesn't need to be in 21-22, 22-23.
Got it. All right, moving on to our special revenue funds, and there is a list of them on the top right. And they are, all these funds that we're going to talk about from here on out are restricted, but predominantly these funds are user fees, like the boating fund, we collect money from the boat ramps, we turn around, we spend it at the boat ramps, recreation user fees, same way. So these are either user fees and they're restricted for a particular purpose, and then this is also where we capture our FEMA disaster recovery and our Gulf Triumph Restore. The sheriff is a special revenue fund. We have several court-related and criminal justice funds. Those are all restricted for very precise activities. And then our road operating and equipment fund, our MSBU, tourist development, and then E911, there is a grant component, and then there's a recurring personnel component as well.
David, actually, for that canvassing board issue, just to step back real quick, there is one election that we will have in 21-22 after this cycle, for the first cycle of next year, for next year's budget. We do have an August primary election that will take place.
Quincy's on the canvassing board, right?
Well, she's actually going to be running this election cycle, so she won't be able to serve on the council board.
That means Mike's got to do it.
Randy Mayer.
Well, we can muddle through this year, and that'll give us the next year to get it right. That's right.
That really, those are really beautiful.
I think y'all said Chuck did an excellent job too, right? Been there, done it.
Make me 6 grade.
In our special revenue funds, our largest revenue here, again, in our intergovernmental funds, so we're not going to beat the dead horse, but in the next slide, we're going to talk about the major changes in our special revenue funds. So our gas taxes are still not quite up to pre-COVID levels, so we're actually budgeting a small decrease there. Under our licenses,
We talk about this CRTPA all the time. It might not just be that, but electric vehicles,
it could be that, but
increased fuel mileage,
we definitely,
issue.
we were definitely on an upward trend prior to COVID, and we have not resumed that since. And so it's a combination of more efficient vehicles, hybrid vehicles, electric, and then maybe still there is some hesitancy to travel, and there's not as many people using fuel. So we'll have to watch that carefully. We're not in any danger. The road department fund balance is good, so we're healthy, but we are budgeting a slight decrease next year. Our licenses and special assessments, that is going to be primarily your MSBU increase that we talked about in a previous workshop. We have set that up where we have segregated the capital component, so each individual property use code has a component that's for operating and a component that's for capital. So that $617,000 increase encompasses both that operating and capital. We'll dig into that in a minute. Our intergovernmental revenues, of course, our CARES Act has gone away, and so what we're budgeting is actually going to decrease. We do have our ARPA funds, but the board approved a budget amendment for those in the current year. So if we're looking at budget this year to next year, it's basically the same because we've already brought that into the budget. Our other big change is our jail bed, our charges for services. We all know that that's gone away. Our transfers, and we've got our $1 million in our new Triumph fund, and then our 2.2 for the sheriff. And so the cash forward is decreased in the sheriff fund by almost $580,000. That's the reason we're not using that cash anymore to balance the budget for recurring expenses, so that's going to go away. And then we had a slight decrease in court-related cash forward, and then our road fund as well, $118,000. And so again, we are going to break these down by the type of expense they are. Only 5 of our special revenue funds have personnel. Most others are just grant or they are contractual or things of that nature. And so we'll only look, we'll get down in the weeds on the personnel related ones. But you can see that we have a pretty large decrease here. Where's my decrease? That's going to be related to our CARES Act and stuff again as well. Go to the next slide. Let's see. We can skip it. We can skip through some of these. So go to the next one. So our share fund, we've got a $2 information technology fund under our court-related that has personnel, our road operating, our MSBU fund, tourist development, and E911 operating are the only ones of our special revenue funds that have salaries, wages, and benefits charged to them. So we're going to look real quick at our special revenue funds that have no personnel costs. Like we said, biggest thing here is going to be our CARES Act went away. Everything else is, if it's decreased, it's probably because they've spent some cash. We've had some court-related expenses this year between the water leak, and then we installed a new security scanner and things at the public interest of the courthouse. So if there's a decrease here, it's most likely because either the project has closed out, the cash has depleted, or so none of these are significant, I don't think, unless you want to talk about one of them individually or no more. But these are pretty routine right here. Our boating fund, which is a user fee fund, it's increasing. That's good. So all of our user fee funds are showing an increase, and I think that's a positive thing.
Obviously, mosquito control has employees, but that's just transferred as a block.
It is, we have a grant match of $35,000 each year. Mosquito control was sitting on a pretty good mountain of cash that has now been spent. And so now we're just going to have those recurring contracted services and then that grant match from the BOCC. So once they spend the cash, their budget's got to come down.
Contracted services.
Yeah, the mosquito control, that's how we record it, is as contracted services. Yes. All right, and here's our sheriff's budget, and there is 5 individual departments now that the ICE correction has gone away. We'll have 4, so that's our bailiff, our emergency management, local corrections, and law enforcement. The emergency management department is funded largely by the state, and then the county gives a contribution to the sheriff, so this isn't what emergency management costs the sheriff, this is just our contribution. Most of your increases here are, of course, going to be related to that new minimum starting wage that was determined through our compensation study that we completed. And we expected this as well, so this isn't a surprise, I don't think. The actual overall sheriff budget did decrease by almost $200,000. But each individual, that's when we take that ICE out and we've reallocated those salary dollars to our local corrections and our law enforcement, so it basically took us right back up to where we were. And I invited our sheriff today. I don't know if y'all have any questions for him.
Solving crime in Wakulla County, you know.
Well, if you have any additional questions, just let me know and I'll get with the sheriff. We've met with him 2 or 3 times. Again, his budget, the largest component is his personnel, so we've talked to him at length about this. So these are our special... she's a busy lady. These are our special revenue funds that do have personnel. Our biggest one is going to be our change. It's going to be our MSBU Fire Fund. I think we all know the reasons for that. There are 6 additional employees there that 38% of their salaries, wages, and benefits are charged to the MSBU, and then there is 1 additional fire inspector position that will be 100% charged here, not to mention the fact that we also have added that capital component. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit because we'll look at these line items in just a minute. But our tourist development, mainly that is an increase in reserve. The tourist development is having a record-breaking year as well, and so we have a significant reserve scheduled for next year. Okay, road operating. Our salaries and benefits portion of this decrease, our salaries and benefits increased $142,000, and then our reserve decreased by $359,000. So those are your biggest changes right there. As we talked about the cash, we had budgeted a lot of cash last year and a large reserve. Well, we are not budgeting that large of a reserve this year. So like we said, we only want to bring that cash forward so we don't put ourselves below fund balance. But a lot of our operating expenses, we're holding them steady. With the exception of fuel, we expect that to uptick a little bit next year. So if there's not any questions about any particular line there, we'll move on to MSBU. The rates that we discussed at our June 21st workshop are on the screen. For residential, that's up from $102 annually. For commercial, it's up just very slightly from 11.9 cents. And then our industrial and warehouse, that's going to be a new property use category. Yep, sell barns, and then our vacant land went from about 22 cents to 79 cents per acre. And then, like we said, each one of those has maybe a penny or whatever that is designated for the capital component, and so we have to segregate that out. Go to the next slide with go to the next one. One more. There you go. Oh.
I just did it.
Okay, so there's our individual line items, and on the table on the right, the very last line item, you can see that MSBU capital component, $273,000. Well, where's your computer?
Yeah, Randy, where's your computer?
Okay, well, if you had your computer open on that last line on the right table, you would see the capital component, and what we've done is we have a subcomponent fund in the MSBU so that we can run a balance sheet, we can segregate that money so it does not get commingled in our operations. And then on our operating, let's see, we've got about a $280,000 increase in our salaries and wages portion. So a large portion of that is salaries and wages, but a large portion of the increase is also capital.
Did we, and I might should have this earlier, did we look at, go ahead and bringing everybody up to $15 an hour? I know we had a plan to look at there, but I know Ed said he didn't hardly have anybody in his office of one person or nobody, so the total amount of employees to our county that we could go ahead and bring them up to the $15 an hour and go ahead and, looks like we're in better shape this year to do it. This seems like this will be the time to do it instead of doing it over the next three years, especially if there's not that many people to go ahead and to try to start implementing.
I'll tell you what the plan is. We're planning that. It takes 90% there.
Of course, this computer's not even on, by the way, so.
One last comment that I would like to make about MSBU. There is a interfund transfer of $222,000. That is the MSBU's payment to the general fund for the administration of paying employees, providing HR, all that type of stuff. That transfer may or may not be made. We're watching the fund balance on this very carefully, and this fund is slowly correcting itself. And so when we get to the end of this fiscal year, we're going to look and see where did MSBU end up. Can it stand to make this transfer? And if it can't, we may put that off one more year. And so that's just kind of how we monitor each individual fund to make sure that they're meeting fund balance policy. If the general fund's doing okay without that transfer, there's no point tanking this fund to make it, and so that's kind of a analysis we have to make at the end of the fiscal year. Now, it is budgeted for because it is a cost of the MSBU. There is a cost to providing HR and things like that for our employees, and so we're recognizing that cost here, but whether we actually spend that money at the end of the fiscal year is a different conversation. Make sense? She's got it.
And you've already maxed out the building department, the fund transfer.
We have maxed, I was just talking to our building official about this morning. He actually asked me to take more money from him. I never hear that. Okay, so our construction funds, this is where we're getting into our 1-cent sales tax and our DOT grants, those type things. We have only $18,943 in impact fees for the library. One day we're going to build a new library and we're going to spend them, but they make up a small portion of this. And so on our revenue, our other taxes up top, that's mainly our 1-cent sales tax. We won't go through every one of these unless you have a question about something. Our new special assessments for internet installation are included in these construction funds as well. Did you get it? All right. Intergovernmental revenues again, guys. Other people helping us out. Mainly this is going to be DOT in here in our construction activities. We have a lot of DOT grants in various stages right now.
Also DEP.
DEP doesn't hit here.
Okay.
And then, of course, as you would expect in construction activity funds, the biggest type of expense we have here is going to be equipment and capital. There are no salaries or wages or benefits charged to any of our construction activity funds or business activity funds. We do not have any personnel here. So this is pretty much either debt service, capital, equipment, or transfers and reserves. So in our construction funds, our big things here are we have Hidden Meadows that we're still carrying forward, $105,000, and then we have our new benefit units for Sweetwater Ridge and Merida Blanca.
That's the performance bond?
Yes, we've been carrying forward this money for as long as I've been here, so 11 years now.
I mean, what's left to do out there?
I was told something about planting some trees in a park, maybe.
Yeah, we've got to address that.
Yeah, and I would say that the letter of credit was only issued for road and sidewalk improvements, so outstanding things like landscaping and playground equipment cannot be purchased with those funds. So Mike and I have talked about it, and I think there's some sidewalk repairs that need to be made and a little bit of road work, so hopefully Mike can start pecking away at that and using it for maintenance in that neighborhood.
Let's say, what happens to the rest of it?
We'll keep carrying the money over until we spend it all on sidewalk and road improvements in there.
Hidden Meadows.
In Hidden Meadows only.
That's the only place you can spend it.
That's the only place, and that's the only things we can spend it on.
So we could repave the road at some point in the future with that money.
Correct.
A little section of it.
So you're probably going to want to redo the entryway. It's the
No.
heaviest hit with the
You
construction.
can't spend it on stormwater, stuff like that.
No, the letter of
Roads and
credit did
sidewalk.
not cover those items. That's
I
correct.
mean, it may pay for most of a lift of asphalt.
Yeah.
And then our remaining, we've got the finishing up of our EOC planning grant is in our construction funds, and then our Hudson Park improvements. We're getting close to seeing some action down there, maybe getting a bid out. That's very exciting. And then finishing up our historical resource survey. In our 1-cent sales tax funds, they make up $6.9 million. We have not sat down with departments yet and set forth a plan for the spending next year. What we have done is looked at the revenues and made estimates and aggressively budgeted, and then we have estimated what cash forward we'll have available. So we have the overall budget capacity set, but it's usually December when we bring that capital spending item before the board, and so we have time to get the budget, and then we make a plan, and then we'll do a budget amendment accordingly to allocate everything what with the plan. So
Opera over there is what you're predicting to
the budget, that's what we're projecting to collect.
collect this coming year. And
Yep.
the rest is money you got in the bank.
Yep, that's right.
Exactly.
So we got plenty of money to buy Ed stuff. I got some
Is that gonna change now that ICE is gone? Because I know we were using some of that money to purchase of the patrol vehicles versus doing it out of the 1 cent sales tax.
Yes, we're going to have to share that public safety component a little more than what we have been for the last several years, and so that's one of the things we're going to have to look at. The sheriff's office submitted with their budget request, a request for a portion of that. I think it was about $248,000, replaces 5 trucks and then outfits them with radios and sirens and everything. And so because they no longer have that funding source in the sheriff's fund, we're going to have to start paying for those here year over year.
David, are all the road funds pretty to go to the sewer, to septic sewer projects? Because we know we've got,
Yeah, the purpose of carrying the 1.4 is for that, yes.
I always get calls about our road up there. And that's, I mean, it was in the budget to be paved. What is it? Last Strickland.
Yeah, this year we
And
were.
Barber Road also.
Yeah, and we were going to do that, but with, between, Cager Poser realignment, Wind Lake
Wind Lake.
realignments, they sucked up all of our funding for this year, both of those.
Yep.
That's
I
right.
get calls about it from Mr. Calvin.
So we got her on the list. We just, hopefully next year we'll be able to do more than what we did this year. So we won't
I'll
have.
tell them hopefully next year. You just
That's
said-
right, because we've got, the reason being is our septic and sewer projects, they'll probably start December-ish, something like that, so it'll be a year before they're ready to pave.
Those 2 roads in particular, I know were in the budget, Barber and
Barber and,
Go Strickland.
John Strickland.
Sometimes the 1 cent sales tax road fund is more of a guideline. When you have projects come up and stuff that have to take priority, yeah,
kind of like the pirate code.
exactly, it's more like a guideline.
Guidelines.
Well, we bought Wind Lake.
Speed limits.
Similar. Oh, goodness. Go on to our next slide. So, these are our current DOT projects that are in the budget. These are all in different states of maybe design, funding, under construction, budgeted, but we don't have a funding agreement yet. So these are all the DOT funded projects that will commence throughout the end of this fiscal year and next fiscal year. And DOT has been showing us a lot of love, and we are supposed to get some of these funding agreements any day to put before you for approval. So you'll be seeing some of these roads really quickly.
Does that Surf Road include rebuilding the bridge?
Nope. No. Can't do it. We tried. The FDOT doesn't own that. They won't spend money on that because it's a FHWA
Yeah.
It's a
bridge.
federal highway.
Yeah, it's a federal
They
highway.
pay money for it either, because
That's
it's a
right.
federal highway.
They won't replace it. They'll resurface, but they won't replace.
Now, let's talk about
You also can't put a sign on it.
Dangerous. Yeah.
Tiger Hammock. Now, there's a part, half of that's paved and half of it's not.
That's resurfacing the paved part.
Only resurfacing the paved part.
Yes. Many of the DOT programs don't touch dirt roads. I think maybe the SIGP does, but they don't want to get involved.
Highway anyway.
Yes, there is not much right away there.
It's a problem.
There's a bridge. It's
Potbelly
like-
Creek, yep,
Sorry.
it's an issue.
Built that bridge, if I remember. You did? Lonnie Ricker, what's that 54 grand for?
That is for design. That's going to be Lonnie Raker south of 267.
Now,
Lonnie
we
Raker
already
south,
called
yeah.
Ivanhoe, but we are gonna try to straighten that jog out on Lonnie Raker, right?
Yep,
Huh?
yep.
But I believe that's one of the funding agreements that we don't have yet, so when we get that agreement and it comes before the board, you'll get a chance to remind them of that again.
I think everybody had, especially if we offer to pay for that right away, it's under the power line anyway, it should be easy.
Well, what Hess said about the bridge in there, how are we gonna try to fund that? That needs to be done on Surf Road. I mean, it's used a lot.
We're currently in this coming up meeting tonight, there's a repair in there for that, but it's also, we've talked to DOT about putting it into their 5-year bridge program to replace, and we're gonna see if they'll do that. They promised to put that, in fact, did it make it? It made the 5-year plan, so it's in the 5-year plan for replacement under a different program within DOT.
That's as good as we're gonna get. It's in the 5-year plan, that's good. Now, the Three Bridges Road, is that not handled through the county at all?
Three Bridges Road, we finally got the final, agreement back signed by Liberty County Forest Service and all those folks, and that's as far as we got.
But we're not involved in it, right? We're not.
No, you just have a maintenance obligation. after
Maintenance
it's done.
obligation, that's it. Now, when that starts, we're not involved in that.
I want that road paved, right, Nanette? Especially the beekeepers. We gotta support our beekeepers. Gotta get the tape sale, right, Chuck?
That's the way to get there.
One way. Good, Brandy.
That's true. You can leave it right there. Our business activity funds or enterprise funds on our advertisement, this is going to cover our solid waste and sewer. We're not going to talk too much about sewer because we have Mr. Henry here with us and he's going to give us all the information we'll need. But mainly here again, no salaries and benefits. These are just our contractual services. So our biggest things here are going to be Waste Pro and ESG. We'll move on to the grant funds, wastewater grants, and these are the wastewater grants that we have, and these are also in various stages of completion. Our feasibility study hopefully will wrap up really close to the end of this year, but right now I got it carrying into next fiscal year. And then we have our Wakulla Gardens and Magnolia Gardens Phase 3 construction. Our Lift Station 76 completion and construction, I believe that's going to be completed. The design portion is, and then we'll have to move forward with the construction component. Michelle's shaking her head at me no, so that could be wrong. And then also we have budgeted our SRF funds for our engineering and design of our future transmission phase components and things, and we actually got the loan agreement from DEP that we'll need to get to legal and Greg to review. So we're moving forward with that. Those are all included in the budget.
Let me ask a question about that Wakulla Gardens connections while Tanya's here. The board passed a rule that if sewer funding is imminent, they don't have to put in a performance-based septic system, right? Well, the health department's not letting them do that.
Well, actually, to clarify, it says that if you budgeted for that project, the board has to adopt a resolution so that the health department can waive the performance-based requirement.
They can override the BMAP? Because, Robbie Miller came to me, the guy...
It doesn't necessarily mean that they can override the BMAP, and remember, those regulations are inconsistent. So if you're in the Springs Protection Area and you're under 5 acres, but over 1 acre, you still have to do a performance-based system. So if this is a lot that's less than 1 acre in the BMAP, then you still have to meet that requirement. I'm not sure that all of Wakulla Gardens is in the PFA, though. I can't remember.
I understand. Well, Magnolia Gardens, whatever.
Right.
This is a little off track in the budget. Forgive me, but I just remembered, so we need to figure something out about it. So that's just ridiculous for somebody to have to do something and dig it up 3 months later.
Yeah, and it's just specific to the county's performance-based requirements, not the BMAP requirements.
All right, we're going to talk about solid waste really quickly, and then we'll move into our wastewater study. Not much to talk about here. Our residential rate, we're proposing to increase to $200. That is a $4 increase over the current year. We have not increased this rate since we implemented it in 2011. It's been the same rate, and so we're anticipating revenue of about $2.6 million. Up to about 2.5 of that will go to Waste Pro, and then the rest of it, we do some small maintenance and repairs at the landfill building and stuff. Now that up to Waste Pro, that all depends on how many homes they are servicing. The clerk's office is working with the building department and Annette's office to make sure they're tracking COs very carefully. We're doing a quarterly adjustment to them, so that is a maximum capacity budget number. It doesn't mean we will pay them that, it's just the maximum authority that we have for the contracted services in solid waste. And then, of course, we have our $20,000 contribution the board does for Keep Wakulla County Beautiful. That's also funded out of the solid waste fund, and they also met the requirement of the administrative regulation for nonprofits. And that's all I have on solid waste.
We still get the small county grant from the state?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And how much is that down to now?
About $115,000, it went up a little bit.
Annette manages that, yeah.
And that's for Amnesty Day?
Monitoring, landfill monitoring, and MC, and any other things that we can find to spend it on. We try.
So we can spend on anything, basically, except paying waste pros.
Right. Now, are there any other questions? I mean, we're gonna have a final wrap up. Are there any questions on this portion of the budget before we flow into wastewater fees?
Better be glad we get grants for the county.
Yes, sir.
If not, my question is, obviously, hopefully it never happens, but it could. We knew we was gonna lose ours. What happens if we lose all these grants? I mean,
Well,
we have a contingency plan for it.
We won't be able to do these projects that we're doing.
Because, I mean, I can see that if we don't have the grants, we're broke.
Well, no.
Well, I'm not saying broke, but there's a lot of, I mean, you got a lot of stuff that just won't happen at all.
That won't happen, that's right.
No Amnesty Days, no key Wakulla County.
Yeah, it won't be a, that's right,
Fluff goes away.
yeah, construction project.
We're lucky.
Project, yeah, yep. And
I appreciate you
planning a
putting it
lot
together like
of-
this. This helped me a lot, actually. So, thank you.
Well, now is our time for and board, I'd like to, Henry, I swear this thing.
It might work better.
Well, hold on, Jessica's name. Board, I'd like to introduce Henry Thomas. He is with Vatilla's group. He is a group that that you guys approved to move forward with on our wastewater infrastructure system fees and analysis, both on the regular monthly basis and access fee. Henry came to us, his company came to us highly recommended and is being knowledgeable, and he is probably, out of all the years I have dealt in this, he is the most knowledgeable person that I have dealt with when it comes to these type things. So with that, Henry, I can't bolster you up any higher than that. It's all downhill from here, right?
That's right.
So thank you. Thank you,
I
Henry.
will say that a lot of effort has gone into this from county staff, Mr. Edwards and Brandy, Nanette Watts and Greg James, all, and I'm sure their staff helped us gather the data and now analyze it and come up with strategies. So it's taken a little time. We've been doing a lot of it remotely, so this is the first time we've had a chance to meet each other in person. It's kind of a new world for consulting. But I'd like to go through it tonight with you to talk about the study itself and how we approach the two major tasks, what assumptions we had to make, because not only are we looking to set rates for the current budget year, or the upcoming budget year, but for the next several years beyond that. So we had to make some assumptions, and then the findings and recommendations of the study. So the first element of this, and you know, as David indicated, we're looking at your monthly user fees as well as your access fees. Two different types of funding and different rules that apply to them, particularly to the access fees.
Just hit that button right there when you're ready.
So that's going to take me forward?
That'll take you forward.
Okay, I was going to say, I'm not sure I wanted you to do it after.
Right, yeah, it's not worth the work that far away.
He's got a good sense of humor. So, with respect to the study tasks and the approach, from an expenditure basis, we developed a 5-year forecast that included fiscal 21 as the base year, and then through fiscal 26. We also looked back and looked at historical trends and costs so that we could question, changes in budget levels and how that related to past costs to make sure that we are comfortable with those numbers. We looked at both the revenues from the wastewater customers as well as the revenue requirements. A major element of this study is your capital plan. Obviously, with the growth you're experiencing, we've got some significant projects out there, a lot of new growth in Wakulla County's wastewater service area. So we've come up with a plan to fund that. It's a combination of access fees and grants. for funding the new stuff. We've also looked at your cash reserve levels, and come up with some targets for the future, as well as year-by-year rate adequacy. So the little chart to the right just shows that we're trying to balance the revenues of the system, gross revenues versus revenue requirements. We've got rate revenues, access fees, and then other types of revenues such as tap fees, interest income, etc. The gross revenue requirement on the other side are expenses, capital expenditures from rates. One of the things that we've built into this plan is to ensure that the county has sufficient monies that they fund annually for renewal and replacement of existing assets. Not for new growth, but for existing assets, because, again, when we started out, we realized that your financial picture is tight on the wastewater system, and we needed to make sure that while you're funding all these new expansions out of grants and access fees, we also have to look to the existing system and make sure we keep it up. We don't want to defer that capital reinvestment in the system. In the short run, you can do that, and in the long run, it'll kill you. So we've tried to, over time, build up the renewal and replacement funding over the 5-year period. We're trying to do this as phase it in as easy as we can. In addition to the R&R capital, we've got the new debts. We've assumed here for the expansion projects, we've got two loans. One has been mentioned earlier, the SRF loan, which will be used for the design and planning of the project. And then we've, in discussions that the staff has had with the folks at the federal level through the program, Act. Excuse me?
Restore?
No, well, yeah, we got the Restore grant.
USDA, I'm sorry.
Yeah, USDA.
Yes.
And USDA in our discussions has indicated that there's a good chance, and that's what this is banked on, that we're going to get a 40% grant towards those projects as well. So while USDA can be a little difficult lender to deal with, they can come forward with some pretty impressive grant levels that'll hopefully make this whole project more fundable, more affordable. So then the last element that we have in here, and we talked about this, Brandy did in talking about the general fund budget, and that's the transfers that the wastewater system would make to the general fund budget for services that are benefiting them from the general fund. This is a little tricky.
It is, yes, very much so.
All right, so the revenues. Wastewater revenues in fiscal year 2021 are running at a rate of approximately $2.3 million. And that estimate was, we came up with, and we tested against your actuals year to date, but the estimate was based on the historical level and rate increases that were previously planned, not through a formal rate study, but through indexing towards of inflationary indexing of the rates year over year. Now, the new customer growth we've built into the plan is significant, and it's on average it's about 330 accounts per year, or about 7%. In the beginning, because of these new projects that you're looking at, we're planning on 600 accounts in 2022. And then that will slowly decline as we get through the new projects back towards more growth that would be normal growth that you would experience year over year of 130 by 2026. So our growth curve is heavy in the first couple of years of the plan. Projected other revenues average about $150,000 a year. That's interest income, we talked about that, miscellaneous revenues, card fees, penalties. Access fee revenues, and this is one of the keys to helping make this work. Access fee revenues
are averaging, based on that growth rate and the new construction, we're going to see in Wakulla County about $888,000 per year over this forecast horizon. So that number starts in 2021 at 1.2 million and then declines down to about 122,000 over time.
Why would it decline tenfold over 5 years? I mean, that's a drag.
Well, because you've got these new neighborhoods that are going to come in and permit, and they're going to have to pay their fees, and then we're not anticipating that those projects would continue, that there's not going to be projects to replace them. It's going to be more normal growth after that.
Why do you think that?
Well, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in year 5.
Well, you're predicting it.
Yes. So we know for sure from planning that these homes are out there, that this growth through these projects. That's why we're extending the transmission systems, we're increasing the plant capacity. But beyond that, we don't have a good feel for blue sky development, and we don't want to say, one of my goals when I do these things is to be conservative. I don't want to have to come back in years 3 and say, we missed the mark and we're going to have to raise rates more. So one of the ways I do that is through being careful not to over-project growth. What I like to say is, so that I can sleep well at night, I don't project growth that I don't know about until I start to see it. Now, the growth in the first couple of years here that's really significant, we know about. The developers are out there. We know they're going to come forward, they're going to apply for permits. Beyond that, I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I've reduced it back to the kind of growth that you've experienced in the past. A little higher, but still not significant new neighborhoods on top of the ones we're already building. I'm assuming even though they come in and permit, also it's going to take a little while for those neighborhoods, for those homes to sell when they're in inventory, and so you're not likely to have more and more neighborhoods on top of that until those homes start to clear the market.
Okay.
Right. So, but again, significant revenues from those fees. The operating expenses that we developed going forward, which are paid from user fees, are based on the 2021 budget level. Then from there, we've had some adjustments we made. First of all, there's a projection of 3 new personnel that are going to come on between FY 2022 and 2024. That was based upon discussions with staff, a total of about $160,000 a year. And obviously, with the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant and the capital projects, additional effort to maintain the system, you're going to require some additional personnel.
And that's for ESG, right?
Yeah, that's ESG, that's right, contract hires. In addition to again, you have a contract with ESG that allows for an annual increase, and then these kinds of incremental expenses like new employees, but also it provides for escalation or increases that are projected, such as electric cost, maintenance and repair, and chemicals that can be incremental. So when you bring that new plant on, you're going to see an increase in some of those expenses, and they're going to be able to recoup those over and above their contract 3%. We also included in here, on the expense side, just an allowance for the fact that we're not going to collect all the revenues we project. The bad debt allowance we've used is 0.25%, or about $9,000 a year.
You just did that one. You're on the...
I'm on the right one. Okay, so beyond the 2021 budget, for your contracts ops with ESG, we've projected 3% annual increase. Repairs and maintenance costs, 3%, consistent with that. General inflation for costs that we, and there's not very many of them in the budget, but certain costs at general inflation, we've used 2.1%. That's based on the Congressional Budget Office's CPI increase. Chemicals and utilities, we've made allowances for higher increases. Typically, chemicals are going up higher than inflation in the utility industry. Utility increase of 5% is not only accounting for the potential for rate increases from your electric provider, but also the expanded flows and electrical needs that the new plants will require.
Lift stations.
That's right, lift stations, all the facilities that use the pumping facilities that use electric.
So what's your average annual growth rate of 7 point, that's the population growth?
No, that's if I take the expenses for 2021, and these are pure operating expenses, not capital needs, computers, things like that, 2.3 million, we're projecting it to grow to 3.3 million by 2026. So that's 7.4% in operating expenses. But part of what's driving that, you've got the 3% baseline contract, which ESG, but you've also got the 3 new employees, you've got higher uses of electricity and chemicals. So that is, not expected to be something that would continue, but it's really a combination of the ESG contract plus the incremental expenses that we anticipate with the new growth. So the capital improvement program is a big portion of this, and it includes the CIP and the R&R reinvestment. The major projects include the collection systems phase 1 and 2. That was 10.1 million. Improvements to the treatment system, 8.8 million. Discharge system, 7.4 million. Lift station rehab, 1.1 million. So lift station rehab, while we can fund new lift stations with access fees, lift station rehab is we don't use access fees for that. That's part of our renewal and replacement budget that we have to fund from
We're
rates.
making it more capacity so you can handle new growth. How's that covered?
Right, so
As we're doing lift station 76, isn't it? And we just did it.
So the ones that are the capacity-related investments we have on the access fee side. But a portion of that investment is to maintain that lift station and extend its life as it currently performs. And we cannot use, under the statutes, we can't use access fees to fund rehabilitation of facilities.
I understand, but if we're replacing a lift station that's not currently in need of rehab because we needed more capacity, who gets charged with that?
Well, we can't, okay, so we're replacing it because it needs new capacity. But you cannot put the entire cost of that onto the new growth because there's a portion of that capacity that was used by existing growth. So the need to replace it is driving the incremental increase in the capacity. The benefit of replacing it accrues to the entire system, not just new growth.
So yes, a portion of it will be paid for with access fees.
And the
Yes.
growth also,
How do you decide which is which?
Well, we relied on the staff to help us look at each of those investments and decide how much would be ascribed to new growth and how much would be ascribed to renewal and replacement.
And that's where I have a problem, is that you have a lift station that has a 15-year life, and you're replacing it at 6 years, okay? Where you had 9 more years on that lift station, and you charge half of it to access, or half of it to, and half of it to existing, or?
Generally speaking, we would use the capacity it's performing at today versus the new capacity.
So if it doubles capacity, it'd be 50/50, basically.
Right.
And this R&R is like for Panacea, lift station
Right.
Panacea.
Well, the majority of our redos are just that, just the R&Rs. Like lift station 76, he's right, Commissioner Hess is right, but that's something that we've got the design capacity of the existing lift station, we'll have the design capacity of the new one, and so we'll know how to break that
Lift
up.
station 3 that was completely replaced.
Mhm.
And none of that would go to access fees.
Right,
So
that's right. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis.
Even though it was upgraded because it was built poorly to start with.
That's right. Well, and we've upgraded some in Panacea that can take more capacity, but we didn't do it for capacity purposes. We upgraded it to get it from single-phase power to three-phase power, which caused a little bit larger pump, but we get better service and performance in the long run, and it's cheaper to run.
Existing.
Yeah, that's right. So there's, each one is a little on the different side.
So the annual capital funded from rates, this would be the renewal and replacements, averages in this plan $530,000 a year. So that's what we've built in. It grows a little over time, but we built that in to provide a basis for continued reinvestment in your assets. Grants are a major funding source of the capital program, approximately $17.6 million. Of that, $13 million is restored grant, and the rest is from the USDA loan forgiveness that we're anticipating.
17.6 million from Restore?
13 million is from Restore. The other amount.
The Restore, the BP fund, the one-time fund that we get?
This is between pots 1 and 3.
Well, the pot 1 is the one we get that we can use for most anything, right? Pot 3 is more restrictive.
A little bit more restrictive, yeah.
Why can't we use Gulf Triumph money for this? It's doing economic activity, it's doing jobs.
We've argued that point, and they've yet to fund one. There's other cities that argued the same thing, and as far as I know, gotten nowhere. So I've heard they have, but I haven't seen anything.
I have trouble using that Gulf EP Pot 1 money for something we can pay for with access fees, because we can do things with that money that we can't do with other funds. We got a funding stream to pay for this. We don't have a funding stream to say.
Well, we have to balance that and debt, and we have to use every bit of available grant funding we can because we got to be able to control debt. You were just given a debt report, and if we were to do our plan now, our sewer system will be at a very high debt, so our debt service will be very high, which is implied over the entire county, so, which is a problem. It's not good, and that's the reason we need to utilize all of the grants. And I understand what you're saying, but we've got to somehow bring that debt service down.
So one of the issues when you borrow from USDA, which again, we're looking at a 40% forgiveness or grant from them as well. But one of the issues is in your loan agreements with USDA, they have certain criteria that you have to make in terms of having rates adequate to make the debt plus coverage, all right? When you look at USDA funding over time with that coverage requirement, when you look at the coverage, and it's based upon the system revenues, which don't include access fees, less the expenses, and they compare that to the debt service amount, and you've got to make that coverage. Well, the issue with USDA is access fees don't help you make coverage. So we are using access fees in this plan to pay down the USDA debt. But when we have to show them our financial performance, we're not allowed to use the access. We can pay for the debt with it. We just can't count it against that coverage requirement. So let's talk a little bit about debt service coverage for a minute. Any lender, whether it be revenue bonds, SRF, or USDA, is going to require a covenant that says we want a multiple of cash flow above your operating expenses compared to debt service, and it's a ratio. So if for every dollar of debt, SRF wants you to have $1.15 of coverage. The USDA requirement is 10%. So you have to have revenues sufficient, even if you're using access fees to pay it, they don't count those in that coverage calculation. So when we're making our coverages, why do lenders want this? Well, one, it gives them assurance you're going to pay it back. But that's not the real reason they put the coverage in there. The reason they put these coverage requirements in there is to make sure you operate at a going concern basis. In other words, that your cash flow over and above operating expenses can pay the debt, but also is sufficient for transfers, and also sufficient for payments such as the reinvestment in the system. So they're looking for the ability of the system to be a going concern, and that's why they put these coverage requirements in there.
So what you're telling me is that they've designed it such that the existing users, okay, are paying the bill for future users.
So what I'm telling you is that the rates have to create coverage that's sufficient to meet the requirement, but the actual expenditures will be funded from access fees.
Yeah, but once the existing users paid the bill, are we going to give them back the money when we use the access fee?
No. The access fee is going to pay the debt. The USDA debt that we're proposing is going to be paid by the access fees.
We're charging the existing users enough to pay the debt.
To pay the debt plus some. But we're not using that for the projects. We're using it for the capital reinvestment and the fact that you're not currently at your cash policy levels.
And the operating expenses.
Right, so we're using it over time. We've got to pay the operating expenses, but that coverage above operations, which I think is what you're referring to, is intended to pay for that $530,000 a year of capital reinvestment to keep to replace old lines, lift stations that need to be upgraded, and to make your
thing. We have to have enough money in that bill, okay, to pay for the new growth, where the access fee is supposed to be paying for the new growth.
No, they're not saying you have to use that. They're not saying that you cannot use access fees to pay for it. What they're saying is your cash flow has to be adequate. If we didn't have that coverage requirement and we use access fees to pay for it, and we didn't put the R&R in there, then you wouldn't be reinvesting in your system. You would not be able to go into the market. So I'm going to show you here that we actually exceed over time, because again, we have a very low cash balance going into 2021, very low. So to meet your requirements, the county requirements of 90 days of O&M plus 1 year of debt service, that's your requirement, to meet that cash requirement plus to fund the R&R, by the end of the 5 years, we're going to be at 150 coverage, not at 110. But that's not a bad thing. You don't want to plan for the minimum. What you plan for is what your R&R needs are, what your total expenditure needs are, and then the coverage kind of should fall from that. It shouldn't be a driver. It should be an outcome. So when we looked at the cash flows for these projects, you've got $888,000 a year of impact fees coming in, or excess fees. The new debt is going to be roughly, hold on, let me calculate precisely. The new debt under the SRF is $416,000. Plus you've got balances. So there's going to be adequate access fees to pay the payments to USDA. Notwithstanding that, we still have to meet coverage. But keep in mind, this covenant you have with them, you're also getting 40% forgiveness. So if you didn't use USDA and you used SRF, which might allow you to use access fees, you're not going to get a 40% grant. The total cost is going to go way up.
And that's the other side of this is not only was it to keep our debt down, but also to keep coverage down so that we didn't, say for instance, we said that we're not going to use that $17.6 million, we're going to cover it with access fees. We had to borrow that's more, 17.6 on top of what we were already going to borrow, which would take coverage with double coverage. So therefore our user fees, well, you're increasing your debt. So it increases your yearly payment. It increases your coverage, therefore increases it on the cut back of the customers.
So why does the lender require the coverage the way they are? Because access fees are speculative.
Right.
This is growth that may or may not occur. User rates aren't speculative. So when you're dealing with lenders that want to ensure that, one, they get repaid, but two, that you have adequate funds to reinvest in the system, they're going to require coverages no matter who the lender is. And in this case, you're having to meet the coverage, but keep in mind, it's only really on 60% of the project costs, because you got a 40% grant built into that as well. So it's really not an onerous thing in my mind. The rate increase that I'm proposing tonight, when we get to it, has nothing to do with the new projects. It has everything to do with the fact that your cash balances are woefully low, and if you don't increase rates, you're not going to make coverage on your existing loans. So if you do that, you're in default. And try to borrow more money going forward if you do that. So the rate increase we're talking about is substantial in the first year. And then from there, it goes back to about 2.5% a year. The debt service associated with the new projects is not going to come on for several years, because you're going to borrow the money, you're going to build the facilities, and then once those projects are complete, you'll start to repay it. So we're looking at a major rate increase, not because of these projects, but because that the current rates aren't adequate to meet the current agreement you have on loans that are already outstanding, plus to build your cash back up to a reasonable level.
So our $40 a month is not enough to cover our current operating in the sewer treatment.
If we don't increase rates in 2022, you will not have enough funds to pay your current costs, including your cash balances would decline further, and you would not meet your coverage requirements for USDA.
So it hasn't been paying for itself.
It's coming to the end of it can't keep going. You're right.
It hasn't been paying for itself.
Yeah, it's getting tight. What we've done is use cash to pay for some of these projects, septic to sewer conversions. We've used some cash there. We've dwindled down the reserve fund balance in the fund to the point where you don't have any flexibility, okay? And then on top of that, I would advise you need to make that USDA coverage. So if we don't increase rates, we won't have money for any R&R projects. We won't have money to pay to meet the coverage on USDA.
Well, the way I understand it, wastewater don't pay for itself anyway, correct?
Normally it doesn't. It's not a moneymaker.
That's the way it's always been.
It's not a moneymaker. It's not a moneymaker.
It's not a profit-making system, and I will tell you that a lot of communities that have water and wastewater systems will actually set the water rates a little bit above cost to help the wastewater rates.
What he's saying is that our cost, we haven't charged enough in the past for our sewage treatment, okay? And now we have to bite the bullet and have a big increase now. And that's,
I'd like to see what the big increase is, and get to that point.
Well, let's keep going.
it's 25%, almost 25%.
I thought it was 15.
No,
I didn't read the thing because I wanted to...
it's 15%.
15%, yeah.
That's the one time, and then it goes back to 2.5, which is what you should be doing, 2.5 at a minimum every year. Okay, and you were doing that, but you had projects that would fund normal inflation and operating expenses, the 2.5 a year. But you've had projects in recent past that you've used cash on hand to pay for, that again has put you in a situation where not only is your cash flow limited, but your cash balances are limited. So we can't work our way out of that. If we had more cash balance, we could overcome some of that. We could phase in that first 15%. But the real constraint, because we look at all these variables, the real constraint is the USDA coverage on the loan. The current loan, not the
Says that
loan.
we have to keep almost as much in the bank as we do to pay the loan.
It's a paradox.
Right.
Yeah, it's a paradox.
So that's what it is.
Yeah.
All right, so we're talking about capital. Let me just go through the two loans are a USDA loan, which we've assumed 40% forgiveness of that loan. And then also, that's above the grants. And then also, if we have the SRF loan in there. So keep in mind, if we didn't get the 40%, if we went to another lender like SRF, we would have an additional, if we didn't use those grants, we'd have an additional $17.6 million that we'd have to borrow, pay the debt service plus the coverage on that. So we looked at this a lot of different ways, and this is the only way we could come up with a solution.
The 17.6 million is not the USDA loan.
No, that's the restore grant, and it's...
And 40% of the...
And a portion, and USDA is a portion of that 17.6. The restore grant is 13 million. Okay, so if you didn't get that grant, you'd be borrowing an additional 17.6 million to make it work, and then you'd have to pay the debt service on that plus coverage. So, in a traditional revenue bond, that's a little different instrument than what you've been using. You're allowed to have a dual pledge that says we have to make 110 based on rates and operations, and we have to make 125 if we include access fees. The reason for that is again, the access fee is speculative. That growth is not insured. So the lender has a two-tier coverage under a revenue bond that may allow you to use access fees to count towards coverage. But again, they're not going to give you a 40% forgiveness. So I think, again, we looked at different funding options, and this was the best one we came up with. And the use of grants was really just to minimize that incremental debt service. Because that debt service, the growth, even though we're counting on quite a bit of it in the near term, some of that's still, those homes haven't been built yet, but the debt is real, okay? So there's a lot of assumptions in here, but once we borrow the money, the debt is real and it'll be with us for a long time. So we're trying to minimize that for the future. The debt service, existing payments are $275,000 a year. There's two outstanding loans. Additional indebtedness of $8.3 million, that includes issuance costs, and that's to fund the expansion projects. It assumes two loans, an SRF loan for the design and a USDA loan for the construction. So again, that USDA portion is reflective of a grant towards that share of 40%. The payments that would begin in 2022 are $263,000. That's a partial year. And then by 2024, we'd have to be paying the full $415,000 a year. The total annual debt service will increase from $275 to $691. And again, that increase, SRF is about $152,000 and USDA is $260,000 of that increase of $415,000 in new loans. So, this is where we are on the adequacy of rates. So we've got your operating expenses are the blue portion of the graph. The debt service requirements are the red portion. And then the two things that we've built into the rate over the next 5 years to make sure you can continue to extend the use of your assets, get the best you can out of their future by reinvesting in them and repairing them, replacing them as necessary. And then the transfer to the reserve is required under the USDA loan as well. But you can see the rates are the black line. And as you can see under these rates, 2021, you didn't really balance that equation in 2021. In 2022, you'd barely pay just your operating expenses and your debt service. Again, you wouldn't make coverage. And as you can see, as you go out in time, now, you could elect not to do the capital fund from rates. Okay, that's at your discretion. But again, that usually doesn't work out well if we don't continually stay on top of annual needs and things that are out there, that if we do defer them, it'll result in public health and safety issues and reliability issues if we don't stay on top of that. So again, that's the revenue from existing rates. The kink in the line is the growth. So that's what we're counting on, and it's still not enough. So we got the
Growth and the 2% rate increase per year?
No, this is at existing rates. This is if we do nothing. Okay.
So you're not even counting that we do CPI right now, right?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
that's not reflecting the CPI then?
No, sir. So let me show you what the, let's just jump ahead here. So what we're looking at is a need for a 15% rate increase for FY 2022, and then we're back to our 2.5% for the remainder of the period. And we've got these,
Now, I'm sorry, the wastewater bill has two components. One is the base rate, the other is the X per 1,000 gallons or whatever.
yes, sir.
So both of those would go up 15%?
We would say with that kind of increase, I would recommend that they both go up equally, because if you don't, your messaging is going to be, well, we increased rates 15%, but if we put it all in the base charge, the smaller users are going to see a much higher increase than 15%. If we put it all in the usage charge, then the larger users would pay much higher than 15%. So generally, when I come up with strategies that I recommend on rate paths, if it's a large increase in a given year, I don't try to look at the base versus the usage charge, because it can result in, well, everybody, if to the extent we don't apply across the board, everybody's bill will go up a different percentage depending on their usage level. So we're trying to kind of mitigate those impacts from saying, well, we need a higher base charge. Now,
We also need to consider that the big users are going to be like Walmart, Winn-Dixie, laundromats. Commercial businesses are going to be the big users, right?
that's right. Small businesses, law offices, insurance, they're
So if we up the per gallon, or, you say the first 5,000 gallons is X, but if we hit it on the usage side, that's mostly going to affect commercial, I would assume. Not necessarily somebody living in Songbird or
right.
a residential home.
Well, or bigger homes would pay more.
I mean, they're not using much water at Walmart, though.
Yeah, so that's right. You got the total bill impacts, and then you got your percent increase. And so it would not be unheard of if we put it all on the usage side for a residential home to come in and tell you, you said we're going to raise rates 15%, but mine went up 25.
Or we haven't looked at the different categories, too. We got commercial, we got industrial, we got residential rates. Those are all different, right? For sewer?
Commercial 1, commercial 2, and residential.
So those are three different base rates, three different usage rates. So we could look at, we don't have to necessarily go 15% across the board. I'm saying we could lean heavier on commercial than on residential, right?
Well, one of the things,
No, I think they should stay in proportion.
well, again, one of the things I'll tell you is those rates really differ by size of meter.
Right.
That's what drives it. And so there really is an underlying unitary rate there. It's just residents use smaller meters. But when you get into the commercial class, you've got different rates for commercial versus larger users based on the meter size they require. So I think that keeping it proportional is the best. You certainly can instruct us to look at other options. Certainly, yeah, certainly. So then this chart just shows us here what happens with the proposed rates. And as you can see, we're trying to track the revenue requirements over time. And those differences between that rate revenue line, the black line, and the costs in, say, 23, 24, 25, are where we're building back up your reserve fund.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing with you. I don't have
No, I'm seeing
a
it.
problem with the 15%. I used to run the wastewater department, so I know how many things need to be upgraded out there because it's junk. There's a lot of junk out there. Right, Nancy?
And that and further down in the collection system.
Yeah, that's what I mean in the collection.
Yeah, and it's scary because it's not something you see. It's underground, so it's easy to kind of lose sight of its condition.
Yeah, see, it's all single-phase grinder pumps. Every one of those needs to be replaced. Force mains need to be upgraded.
Lift stations mainly, we got 90-plus lift stations now, so.
We got 2-inch force mains in some area, which
Yeah.
doesn't even meet close to meeting standard.
So this shows you your projected cash balances, okay? And what we have here is, as you can see, the operating reserve is the blue. And as I told you, it's very, very low relative to your own internal policy and to any level that would be advisable. Then the Debt service reserve, that's a function of USDA requirements. You gotta build up a debt service reserve for that debt. That's the yellow at the top. So the big balance here is your access fees. And they're available to pay for expansion-related projects. And these are the balances after the payment of the annual debt from USDA in the last couple of years of the plan. So what that's telling us is by 2026, that fund will have $4.4 million in it. And even though you don't get to count it for coverage, you can use it to pay the debt payments, of which the projects are $451,000 of annual debt. So you've got 10 years worth of access fees in the bank that you can pull from annually to help make those debt payments. And that's how we've programmed this.
You got 10 years worth of debt payments in the bank to make.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, access fees equal to 10 years worth of debt payments. Yes, sir. And that assumes, that doesn't count on any further growth after 2026, which I'm being a little conservative on, and you would probably like me to be a little more optimistic. But if it is more optimistic, that'll just put more money in the funds. That'll extend that out further if the optimistic projection occurs.
My question is, why 15% right off the bat and then 2.5%? I mean, that's a big increase. I can understand have to have the increase. I get that part of it, but a 15% right off the bat. I mean, I don't understand.
The biggest constraint was to make the coverage on the USDA loan. Okay, the reason those cash balances are so low in 2021 is you didn't have adequate cash flow. Okay, and you use some of your cash balances to pay for some of your capital projects. So when we model this, we look at operating expenditures, capital expenditures, we look at all the constraints, and your constraint was your USDA loan. So if we don't do the 15% increase, we're not going to make your coverage. And then it's going to be very difficult to go back. You could go to USDA and say, we're not going to make coverage, please forgive us. I wouldn't advise that. But if you don't speak to them about it and you go back to them and say, we want to borrow another $9 million from you, they're going to say, well, you're not making coverage on what you have now. So when you enter into these debt obligations with these lenders, you want to meet these covenants.
When was the last time we had an increase in sewer?
We've increased sewer just about every year.
Every year we have?
Yeah, but what we did, we followed the CPI, and what we were not doing is increasing it enough to keep up with coverage. And we never made debt coverage, so therefore this year, we straightened out a bunch of stuff, and part of this, that's where it came to light. We were not taking care of coverage.
Well, and you use some of it for capital.
That's right. So this corrects the ship.
And people in Smith Creek don't have to pay for property.
That's right. That's right.
So how much of an increase have we had every year? I mean,
It averages 2%, wouldn't you say? Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes a little more.
what's the average sewer right now?
$43.
43?
Let me take you to that.
Yeah.
What is it? How much higher?
So you would go from 4305 to 4952 with that one-time 15% increase.
A year?
No.
No, that's monthly. That's your monthly.
Monthly, but yes.
Yeah, that's the annual increase. Now, these are programmed to start in April of each year. So we wouldn't make this increase until April of 2022.
That's so far in the future.
Well, it gives people a little time to plan and know that it's coming.
That's our normal increase cycle.
How much was that from 43 to what?
Is it over here? 4952.
It's on this.
Does that 49, does that include the CPI as well? Or is
So that's the total.
That's the total.
That's the total. So if you did a CPI, 2.5% of that would be the CPI, but that's the total increase. No CPI on top of it. And you can see we've compared you with a number of communities here in Northwest Florida. I work for a number of them, and I can tell you that folks like Gulf Breeze, Panama City, I mean, everybody's increasing rates, okay?
A lot of us also probably have water systems to subsidize wastewater.
That's correct, every one of them.
That's the big difference with us, is we don't have a water system to subsidize it.
Well, water use is...
City of South Chavez, the smart ones, they got water and no sewer. We got sewer and no water.
Water use is discretionary, and a lot of local governments will charge more for water because, one, there's an emphasis on conservation. People know that it's a precious resource, and so we see it often where the water rate will be... The lenders look at water wastewater systems as a single enterprise. So as far as making the enterprise requirements for debt coverage and such, they don't care if it comes from water or wastewater. The lender, the customers may care, but like I said, a lot of local governments elect to have higher water rates relative to costs because sewer is more of an essential service.
So can you separate out the cost of expansion from the overall, the day-to-day maintenance?
I can't do that, and what I would tell you is that I would come up with the same answer that I have before you now, because the cost of the expansion is funded from access fees. What's driving the rates is coverage on existing debt in the first year, and then the coverage that we have to apply to the USDA loans with the new loan is really being used for capital reinvestment of about $530,000 a year, and building that operating reserve up from that level very low to somewhere just over $1 million. And you can see that in the blue portion of the chart. So that's driving the rate increases, not the...
Making coverage is the big driver, though.
The big driver, because it's right off the bat. That's why we didn't have any choice. I mean, we said, what happens if we phase it? And when we phased it, we didn't make coverage.
Greg, you said we've never made coverage.
We've never made coverage since you just got the debt report, going back to 10-11. We've never made debt service.
But we just got new loans.
Never even hit one, much less 1.1.
But we just got a new loan from SRF, right? Recently.
We submitted an application for an SRF loan.
Showing them that we're going to be able
Well,
to...
you're right, we have a USDA loan we secured 3, 4, 5 years ago.
We've got new debt.
That's the one, we've gotten new debt, we have not covered that debt, that's
That is
correct.
what we're doing tonight.
And that's what the purpose of, we're correcting the ship, saying we need to start covering our
The point
debt.
is,
Right.
you say going back to 10, 11, we've never made coverage, right? But if we got a loan 3 years ago,
What we should have been doing,
right?
We did not have the money sitting in the bank.
That's because it wasn't a USDA
Exactly.
loan.
So I would be remiss not to recommend that you meet those requirements, because it's a legal contract with the lender, and it's pretty clear how it works. And if we could use access fees to make coverage,
No problem.
we would be in a different situation, but we can't. But that's not onerous in that you do need to start doing more reinvestment in the system, and you do need to build your cash reserves up. So that's what really is that's the benefit of making the USDA coverage, okay? Because, and in fact, beyond that, the coverage that we'll achieve by the end of this, as we build the cash up, that year will hit 1.5 times. And that's really what your financial advisor would tell you is the market target, 1.5 times coverage. Because they're saying in addition to whatever annual debt service you have, about 50% of that amount you should be building back into the system for capital reinvestment. The other thing I will say when you compare yourself to the other local governments, and just to be fair, is that many of those governments that have the water and sewer system also have a transfer to the general fund that has nothing to do with the transfers that that Brandy talked about tonight. In other words, cost-based expenses for human resources, for management. They have a transfer that is akin, they're public systems, but it offsets the tax levy, and they just take it. And I had a client that didn't have any transfers, and then one year when the budget got tight, they said, what's everybody else doing? And the transfer levels for just that transfer to the general fund to offset taxes run about 6 to 8% in most systems. So they went from 3, they started at 3, they're now at 7. And so they're building up, if you will, a return on investment in their rates as well. So that is that's another cost that you don't have because you're not doing those transfers. You're selling your wastewater at cost.
Also, if you could speak to, real quick, if we don't have any impact fees, sewer impact fees.
Access fees.
Well, we got access fees, but we don't have impact fees, if you may.
Well, you can't use them on this.
But the point is what could impact fees be used for if we had sewer impact fees?
Well, impact fees are basically, this is my opinion, akin to your access fee.
Exactly.
Okay, you call it an access fee. My client in New Smyrna Beach calls it a capital connection fee. They're all going to look the same under the law, okay? And so it's used for expansion-related capital. That's all it can be used for. And it's restricted. If you have a water and wastewater system, you can blend user rates, but you got to use water impact fees for water, and you use wastewater for wastewater. So it's a very there's a lot of rules for the use of.
Whereas if you just increase the access charge, you can use that for anything.
No, to me, the way we develop your access fee is equal to an impact fee.
They're the same deal. In fact, the same statutes govern access fees as impact fees, and the reason I was bringing that point up was there are some folks that are saying, well, why don't you use impact fees? They understand access fees are the same, and you can't use impact or access fees to run the operation of the wastewater treatment plant.
Can't
Right.
do it. Use
It's just, if it was impact fees / access fees, it's strictly for capital improvements moving forward.
And debt service.
And debt, that's right.
Yeah, and you can pay,
But we can charge a high enough access fee to pay the debt service and to build the new system.
But you can't, that won't satisfy the law folks, and that's what we've got now, is you can't do that. But you have.
Is it high enough to pay all those?
You have, but you can't do that.
on an expenditure basis, it is, okay? That's why we're collecting $880,000 a year, the debt's only $491. So it is paying for it on an expenditure basis, okay?
Well, yeah, but we're building a $30 million project, and so how do you figure that it's gonna, your $1 million a year is gonna pay for that in the next 10 years, 15?
Well, it's not going to pay for it because that $30 million project has also got $17.3 million in grants buying it down.
Yeah, but that's not access fees paying for it, when we're using one-time funds to get as a grant to pay for it, when we could use that one-time funds for something else if we raised our access fee.
You're correct. You're correct. We could borrow $17.6 million more, have more debt, have more coverage requirement if we do it through USDA, but we'd have much higher access fees. So let's look at access fees. Want to talk about those for a second? I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to respond to your concerns. So the methodology we look at is we look at the assets that are out there today and the amounts of those that were grant funded, and then we also build into there. And we've got, of that lift station rehab, we've got $1.6 million in the access fee. We've got 7.1 of the discharge system, 8.4 of the treatment system, and 9.6 million of the collection system. That's the total project. But we exclude we exclude out of your CIP 20.8 million, which is either non-growth related or R&R, are grant funded. So it is net of grants when we calculate this fee.
Well, yeah, the 20 million is we're using grants to pay to subsidize development.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I just,
That's correct.
and I don't have any problem when the state gives us a grant that we can't get used for anything else, like, the DEP stuff. But my problem is I come back to the BP money, which we get to use for most anything we want. And I have a real problem using that money for this project.
So the fee proposal is to go from $3,850 to $4,050. That's an increase of $200 for each new customer and each residential equivalent. And this is the comparison of where you're at right now compared to the same utilities that we showed you the wastewater rate comparison. So you do have among the highest fees in Northwest Florida right now for access.
Still a lot cheaper than our performance-based septic system.
Yes.
So, I guess I'm taking Chuck's side a little bit. I wouldn't mind it being higher. I don't tell any contractors I said that, but.
Well, I just, we're gonna use the BP money, and I just have a real objection to that, is using that BP money that we can use to buy the Talcum system.
I understand your argument.
Okay, and
So I can run for you a scenario where we use less Restore Act money. But I'm gonna tell you, we've already run some of those, and they result in higher rates.
Yeah, I remember you.
I understand the higher rates for the users, but why, if we're gonna be paying for it out of access, couldn't we rebate those, higher rates back to the user? Because we're not using it for that, we're only using it for debt coverage. So once we have once we charge it once, in the future, we can rebate it every year.
I've never seen that. Each year stands alone in the lender's eyes. So you gotta make that coverage each year. Cash flow. That's cash flow, not pay.
Cash on hand.
Yeah. No, not cash on hand. That's revenues, less operating expenses, divided by debt. That's what they're looking at. And you don't get to count access fees as revenue. So if you borrow more, you're gonna have to, your debt's gonna go up. Yes, we can raise access fees to pay some of that, but the coverage is gonna go up too. And we don't charge the coverage to the access fee. It's the direct capital cost of the project.
So in any situation, the current user has to subsidize the growth for the new developer.
In this case, because of the grants, that isn't the case because they're not subsidizing the new growth. They're helping replenish the cash balances and fund $530,000 a year in R&R, which is really the responsibility of existing ratepayers. And the way we got this,
I don't have a problem with the 530 million, but you're...
530,000.
530,000, coming out of the wastewater treatment, the sewage bill. My problem is the access fee seems not to have been covering the total development cost of this project, of this system. And I want to know why we're not charging enough for it to continue to cover that cost.
Okay, so when we developed the fee, we developed it with the assumption that the grants were used to help pay for the capital plan. We cannot get money from Restore and turn around and charge new growth a higher amount. Free capital grants have to be netted out against your access fee charges. So if we use grants to pay for it, then we have to net that out of the monies we put in the fee.
So that's still comes back to the same thing, is that we're basically a welfare county for sewer, where we're getting the state's paying for it, or the BP's paying for it, or somebody else is paying for a project that should have been covered, paying for itself through time.
Well, I assume we want the USDA grant, right? So the question is, how much restore money do you want to use?
Right.
So, I mean, we can run some other scenarios, but we brought you the one that had the least rate impact over time.
And why couldn't we rebate back, we're still showing the income, okay? And the rebate back to the customer would just be an expense, but we would still be showing the income.
Because that's not in the terms of the USDA loan.
Your expenses go up, yeah, you
What you're saying is new growth, we'll take that money and give it back to operations.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You can only pay for capital projects with those funds.
No, the new growth would be paying for the bill, and you would be having your your fund balance increase coming back and paying back the customers.
So then the fund balance wouldn't go up. If you gave it back to them, we wouldn't achieve that balance we're looking for, which is a stronger financial position, cash position. You're not meeting, you mentioned that we weren't making coverage. You're not meeting your policy on your cash reserves. You're not meeting it today. So it's y'all's call. You can say, we don't care about that policy, but we're trying to meet the policy. And we're doing what we think is the right thing to have contingency. Remember, these utilities are capital intensive and high cost, and you need operating reserves. You can't run it down to the level it is now and sustain it.
So what would happen if we didn't use the BP money? How much would it be? You've already run the scenario.
I don't have it with me, but I'll get you.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Henry, I'm looking it up here where y'all ran it. I'm pretty sure it was hitting the $65 to $70 a month.
Bill.
That was the difference.
It goes back to meeting coverage.
And then also, we've increased our county overall debt into a dangerous territory. So there's two balls we gotta juggle here. And I think that man right there would probably have a problem if we didn't utilize all these funds.
It's no different than Parks and Recreation.
Right.
We do not charge our users the fee to cover the entire cost. We subsidize it with taxes. We subsidize everything, everywhere, and every time you take a grant, you are subsidizing something, and this is no different.
I can tell you the City of Gulf Breeze is entertaining rates right now, where they would also use their restore funds to buy down the cost of their next wastewater expansion. So this is not unusual for communities to choose to do this, is my point. But we can give you, David's may have it on file.
Yeah, I've got it here somewhere, but it was around $65 to $70.
I will make sure we get you those numbers.
Yeah.
It's like Commissioner Kemp mentioned before in the previous meeting. Look at all the grants we get. You take all those away, you reject those to get the true cost and charge everybody the true cost, you don't have enough tax money to do that.
I mean, I would like to have the rates go up less. Honestly, I think, how we use those restore funds, it's not my call. So I'll do it any way y'all see fit, but you might not like the answer is all I'm saying.
Well, I'm curious, if we haven't had that much of a connection fee from $38.50 on, why are we only going up $200 to that?
That's
Because of the grants. We can't
go up more than that because of the grant. Okay.
We can only do the net costs in the fee.
I got it. I was just curious why it was only a $200.
Oh, if we didn't have the restored money in there, it would go way up.
Okay. All right, that's what I need to know.
Mr. Thomas, I know that we're on page 63 of 89, but are there any highlights we need to pick up on within the next?
We talked about the comparisons, we talked about the cash, so I just want to go to the last one.
Thank you, there we go.
And our recommendation would be to adopt the proposed access fees.
Good job, Chris.
You need to review them periodically, especially as development trends. If we continue to grow at a fast rate, this whole thing is going to look better down the road. And then maintain separate accounting for their collection and use. and this is the access fee part. And you also can't put them in, you want to give a 90-day grace period. So if you adopt the fee tomorrow, you don't start charging it for 90 days. That gives the building community, they've got a strong lobby, and a lot of these rules have been directed by them through the legislature, and that gives them time to build that cost increase into their...
The cost increase will be $200, so.
Yes, it is going to be a big one. So let me go back to the rate one.
Now, what about the access fees for commercial? And those are much higher, right?
Yes. Yes, it goes up.
Those will go 15% up too.
The user rates, they'll go up 5%, but it's going to be a big amount of dollars.
So you didn't show us the commercial access. You
No, we do it per equivalent residential unit, and David, we have a chart that gives you that. When you get the study, it'll be in there.
Right. That's all measured off the same thing.
So, the existing rates are not sufficient. You've been actually indexing them annually, but you haven't done a full study since 2012. And I think that's where things might have got a little off track. Due to low starting reserves, increased operating costs, renewals and replacements that we're funding, the proposed debt rate adjustments are 15% in 2022, 2.5% thereafter. And we think you should stay on top of this a little more. Maybe every 3 or 4 years we look at your whole system.
That's what I was fixing to say, that what David said and what you're just saying is do this every few years, not wait till 2012 and here's 2021 and we're doing a study where I understand we had a 2% increase every year, but now we're going to hit somebody with a 15% this year and then turn around each year having a 2.5, and I just hate having to hit somebody 15% all at one time. But I don't think you, from what this right here, what you explained to me and what I see, I don't think you have much of a choice.
Well, in my view...
For the loan part of it.
Right. In my view, you've got to meet that one. Had you gone back and instead of doing inflation, been doing, say, 4 or 5% a year, you'd probably be in pretty good shape right now. And that wouldn't have been
a lot, though, 4 or 5% a year, though.
Yeah, well, on $40,
that, I mean...
Yeah, on $40, it's not a lot of dollars, but I do get it.
But it adds up over time when somebody lives from paycheck to paycheck.
Yes, sir. But it's easier to absorb that than 15% all at once.
Yes,
That's what
I agree. That's my point, is all of a sudden now here we are, got to go at 15% right off the bat. So that's a big jump from 2% every year to 15.
We also have a lot of new customers signing up all the time. All these new construction homes, probably, 100, 200 a year at least?
We're going to probably hit about 300 this year.
So those new customers have been factored into this.
Yeah, we factor that.
Yes, and they're helping pay the costs, including making that coverage.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
They made a big difference in the rates.
If we took the growth out, it would be impactful.
Yeah.
If we took the growth out, we wouldn't need the new system, so it's, should we do a CPI increase on our access fee? Index that?
So I think you've got to be careful with that because the case law says you can't have a windfall. So I'm putting in the assets at their cost. And if you index them, that presumes that some customer next year, the cost was higher than what it actually was.
That could be updated every 3 years.
Yeah, you look at where you are in time and update it.
Some of it won't cost nowhere near as much to...
No, sir. This first time through is a major effort.
Similar to an impact fee study, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. It needs to pay for itself. So. And people in Smith Creek, again, don't have to subsidize it, which they kind of are now, I would say. Not really, but you know what I mean.
Well, there's a little more in this packet than we went over tonight. Look it over before you have to make decisions. And then there's also a report that David has that'll give you all the detail you want. And if David, if you want, I can dig up those runs we did earlier. or easily recreate them.
I don't need it.
Very good.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
That's all you have, thank you.
And I appreciate you asking me the questions as we go, because I don't want to just sit up here and talk at you. So,
Talk at you.
Told you it was a tough crowd.
Yeah, really.
sorry.
That's good.
That's why I'm here.
That's right.
That's why I got all this gray hair.
Exactly.
It wasn't gray two or 3 years ago.
2012?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, anybody have anything else to say from up here, Commissioner Hess?
I think I've said my piece.
Okay.
There was no increases in the dump fees for septic haulers or anything?
Not yet. We haven't addressed that yet.
Commissioner Kemp, you got anything to add?
No. Thank you.
Anybody from the audience got anything to add?
Marge?
Greg? Marge? All righty, we gonna conclude?
Yes.
I think that's it.
That's it.
Motion to conclude.
Thank you, Randy.
You go back to work in another half hour.
That's right.